These are really cool, by the way, if you've ever seen one of these. This is a spring punch, and it's two center punches with the spring between them, and they touch in the center, and the center is actually not in the middle. The break point is way off to one side. And what the idea here is that the small one has a blunt point, and the long one has a sharp point, and that's for harder materials and softer materials. So if I was center punching plastic or wood or something like that, I would use this side. Instead of doing steel, I'm using this side. And it's shorter, so the other side is longer and has more mass, so this is the hammer. The side you pull back is the hammer. So you pull the spring back and you let it go. It clicks, and that drives the point into the steel. And I find this a lot more accurate than holding it and hitting something with a hammer. And what you do is you kind of feel for your scribe scratches, get it centered, and then you can just hold it. It doesn't move. And I'm holding that down against the steel, and I pull this up a little bit, and just let it go, and it goes ding. And that makes a mark. And a cool thing you can do, I start with a really small one. After I make a mark, I look at it. Because sometimes you miss by a little bit. Sometimes it's not perfect. In fact, pretty much always not perfect, because perfect doesn't happen. But I can see that my center punch mark is just a little bit too far that way, and because I made it small, but it's there, you can feel it. You can get this point right back in that divot every time by hunting for it, and then I can angle it a little bit and do a little bigger strike, and that actually drives the displaced material towards the center point, and it gets a little bit bigger. And there's a limit to how much you can do that. There's only so much force this will put out, and at a certain point it will stop displacing material, particularly in steel, and the punch won't get any bigger, and you can't pull it anymore. But I usually do it, 3 times, and each time I can just see each one's a little bigger. I pick the direction, and by the time I'm done, that's on the scribe to within 0.010 of an inch, and that's not to say that this part is going to be good for 0.010 of an inch. My scribes could be off a little bit, the drill bit can be off relative to the center punch, but every step of the process, the more accurate it is, the less it's going to add up to the total stack up, and the better your part's going to be. And this is going to be welded. It's fine if it's not perfect, if it's not precise. But it just kind of makes life easier, If it's accurate, then there aren't problems later, and it doesn't take much longer to take a little care and to put that punch right just where I want it, and might save me some headache later. That's an interesting problem you may run into if you're notching for welding with a hole saw like I am, is these parts. I'm working on these. These are going to bolt to the side of the tailgate through here, this space on the side, and the hinge barrel will weld like that. And so I'm notching with the hole saw again, and this is such a small amount, I could just mark that and grind it out. It would have been fine, but I'm set up with the right size hole saw and everything, so I decided to do it this way, and this is pretty clean. But it'll go in there and weld like that. The challenge with this is that the center point of my hole saw is entirely off the part. And the hole saw uses a pilot bit, which drills a hole, and then that keeps the saw from wandering and walking as it starts to drill. And particularly with interrupted cut like this, the chip force as it's drilling this hole, the force on the cutting edge of the saw is a tangent to this arc on all points. And so at the apex here, if it's spinning clockwise, there's going to be a counterclockwise tangential force right here acting on the tip of that saw. And since there's no material out here, there's no counteracting force on the other side. Normally, if you're just drilling into the center of a piece, every tooth has another tooth 180 degrees opposite of it with an equal and opposite direction reaction force, so it balances itself and it won't do anything crazy. We're drilling this hole saw just wants to walk out of the part. So trying to do this without any pilot bit support won't work. My other parts, like these, the pilot bit was in the part. So even though it had the same problem, where there's a portion of the cut that has no material, so there's a net force as this works around and the saw teeth cut the steel out of this hole. It wants to move. It wants to shift and go this way, essentially, go the opposite direction of the force that would be generated by the missing material. But there's this pin in a hole in the center that's stopping it from going anywhere. And that's why this works. We don't have that here. We have to get this to be stable without that. So we have to essentially support and guide the hole saw a different way. And this is what I tried a couple of things, but this is what I ended up coming up with to do it. I took a piece of scrap steel and I drilled it up complete hole in it, 1 3/8 with the same hole saw, and then I scribed the center line of that back to the edge of the part and then offset from that. So I have a series of scribes in here at known distances, 1/2 inch and 1.5 inches. And so what I do is I take this and I put it in my vise. I want some hanging out so that I can reference this. Oh, and this hole. So this hole is centered at a point that is 1/2 inch from this face, and this is 1.5 inches wide, so that's also 1 inch from this face, same thing, and 2.5 inches from this face, and this is not that tall, so that lands off the part. When I drilled this hole, I located 2.5 inches from the edge of my jig here, so that's taken care of. So what I can do, this one's done. Here's one I haven't done yet, not notched. Is I can take this and set it on here, and you can see how this hole is going to take, visually, that's what takes this much material out of this channel. And I can take this and I can line it up with my scribe lines. I can line up one side with the 1/2 inch mark, line up the other side with the 1 inch mark, and they're different. This is not exactly 1.5 inches wide because, again, I did my best, cut it with the angle grinders. So we can kind of split the difference and get it about where it needs to be. And I'm going to take a couple of magnets, a couple of welding magnets, and stick them on that here. Screw that up. And these are gonna, main thing these do is flush up the back face of my workpiece with the back face of my jig here. But they're also going to hold it while I do my thing here. And now, well, just tacks. So I'm going to put a tack here and here to hold these two pieces together for the next step. These tack together. Take them out of the vise. And what I'm going to do, you see here, that is the material that I want to remove. Now this isn't as good as using the pilot bit because there's some play here, and a hole saw drills a bigger hole than its diameter. Let me explain that. That didn't make any sense when I said it that way. The teeth on the saw, like many saws, are bent in and out. So if you unrolled this and laid it flat and it was a straight line, one teeth would be bent to the left a little, the next tooth would be bent to the right a little, the next tooth would be bent to the left a little, and so on. And that helps clear chips, and that gives it a suitable geometry for sawing. If you look at most conventional wood saws, they're built the same way. But that means that every other tooth on this is bent out a little tiny bit, and that defines the diameter of the hole. And so as soon as you get up past the teeth, of course it's not bent anymore, and the amount of that bend defines how much larger the hole this drills than the diameter of the shell. So once it starts drilling, the outside of the shell is going to bear on this, and it's partly smaller than the hole it's going to drill. So this is not going to be perfect. I'll show you when it's done, but it's going to try and force the bit away until it stops, and that's going to be there's going to be some misalignment between the jig hole and the hole that I drill, but for this application it's just fine. Oil. There we go. So, there's that. Just a little bit it removed. I'm not sure if this is going to show up on camera, but you can see. Let me get my pointer here. You can see we have the hole in the jig, and we have the hole in the channel that I just cut. And over here on the right, they're pretty the same. They're planar. It's not a plane, but it's right on. But on the left side, there's a step here. If I run my scribe down this edge, it hits, because the hole that I just drilled, because it was turning clockwise, it tried to force the bit this way until it hit this side of the jig, and because the size mismatch I talked about earlier, it was able to do so a small amount. So the hole that I placed is not concentric with the hole in the jig by a small amount. This is very academic on this project, this being a weldment, and for a take-side truck made out of 2x4s and scrap plywood, that amount is really, really unimportant. Never going to be an issue for me. But it's a thing to be aware of if you use this technique to center a hole saw on an interrupted cut, that your results aren't going to be perfect, and you may need to account for that. You may not, depends on what you're trying to do. Pro tip, if you're doing a bunch of grinding like this, and you find keep lighting yourself on fire, it's kind of a hassle to have to keep stopping and putting yourself out, so take a spray bottle of just water and mist down the front of your jacket a little bit. Problem solved.